Thank you very much. Despite what it says in the programme, it is just me today. Imogen couldn't make it, but I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm Susannah. I'm from Make Space for Girls. And this is a kind of very short introduction into why we need to think specifically about teenage girls in terms of parks and some of the really quite straightforward things we can do. When Make Space for Girls has been going as a charity for about 2.5 years, and when we were thinking about setting it up, obviously one of the things we did was talk to lots of teenage girls. And Lily was the daughter of one of my friends, and I just happened to meet them in the street, and I said, well, what do you do? Do you go to the park? And she just looked at me with the 10,000 yard stare that only a teenage girl can do and said, why would I go to the park? There's nothing there for me. And in that, she basically summed up why Make Space for Girls exists. And funnily enough, we did end up forming a charity. So we campaign for parks, public spaces, meanwhile spaces, the little weird corners of stuff that teenagers use, to be as inviting. Well, we say as inviting to teenage girls as they are to teenage boys, but actually we're not even that great at providing for teenage boys. We need to make public spaces better for teenagers, but we really need to make them a lot better for teenage girls. We're here to help people do better. Am I making funny noises with the microphone? Is it too close? That's better. We're here to share good practice, to share other people's experience, research, to help work with people to get some research, but really to make things go better by thinking about spaces differently. This isn't just about, at the last minute, dropping in some slightly different facilities into a park. It's about, as you've heard from Anna, reimagining how we think about spaces from scratch to make them work better, which doesn't have to be expensive, but it does take a bit of thought. So starting those conversations really early and taking a holistic approach, as with safety, to the whole park, and thereby making it better. So what is our problem? Teenage girls really are not served very well by parks at all. Because when we build things for teenagers, quote unquote, or when we write about teenagers in the play strategy, it says that we almost always end up with a list of facilities that goes skate park, BMX track, Muga or basketball court, the fenced pitches that Anna was talking about. All of these facilities are pretty much dominated by boys. We did some research that I'll get onto in a bit, but basically 90% of park facilities for teenagers are those three, and averaging it out, they are 90% used by boys. So girls are really left with nowhere to go and nothing to do. And as the last bit says, what we want to do is change the way we build parks, because one response is, oh, let's get the girls to skateboard. And it's like, should we ask the girls if that's not what they want to do? Because maybe they don't. Not to try and fix the girls to go with the facilities we've got, but actually to change what we're offering. So this is what we're aiming for. This is the park as designed by teenage girls. It's got spaces where you can be active. It's got spaces where you can hang out. It's got spaces where you can play. We're actually really bad at providing play for teenagers, full stop. Everything we put into parks tends to be really didactic. Play football there, skateboard there. But when you talk to teenagers in general, they want to play. So playful spaces, swinging and hammocks, really important for teenage girls. We'll get into a lot of these things in the workshop later on. So that's the ideal of what they would like. The reality is not that great. So earlier this year, we did a piece of citizen science. We got people across the country to go to their local park, count who was using the teenage facilities, count how many of those were girls. Because nobody's ever gathered any data before. There was literally no data. We built thousands of Mugas, but nobody knew who was using them. So we do now know. Mugas are 92% used by males. There's a little bit of variation in that. It's more used by girls in London because they don't have anywhere else to go. But generally they are very, very male. Skate parks, 85% male. That fits with Skateboard GB's own estimates. And another bit of research that was done last year by Yorkshire Sport talked to a load of teenage girls across 3 schools in Yorkshire. 68% of girls have seen what's going on. They think there's nothing for them in parks, and they don't feel welcome in parks because the spaces are so excuse me, dominated by boys. So the girls know there's a problem, but what they've actually done is they just don't see parks as being for them. They've given up on parks and they're going to other places. Excuse me. So, Moogers. As Anna said, Moogers are basically designed to terrify girls. They've got high fences, narrow entrances, and they're full of teenage boys. As a grown woman, I wouldn't walk into a Mooger. No, the worst ones have chicane entrances. So you really, it's just impossible to escape. They're terrifying. And then we wonder, and then we go, oh, but we have produced good provision for teenagers. No, they're full of boys. So it's not surprising that they are almost entirely used by boys. The other thing that happens with spaces like Moogers is if you build one space, it will get taken over by the most dominant group. So that's not often teenage girls, but also it means there are lots of boys who don't feel very comfortable on the Mooger. But because there are big groups of boys, it also deters girls from going in the space. Like I said, there's studies from Europe which show that girls are more active in spaces that don't have a Mooger. Now, we see this even more with skate parks. They're slightly more inclusive at 85%, but the spaces are dominated by older teenage boys to the extent that girls, when you talk to teenage girl skateboarders, they do use them, but they get up early in the morning so that they can use them when the boys aren't there. They tell us that they go when it's rainy, the surface is rubbish, but the boys aren't there. We've talked to skateboarders who've had rape threats, who've had stones thrown at them, and they're the ones who've survived and gone, yeah, but I'm carrying on. The boys actively territorialise the space. But again, because they gather lots of boys in them, skate parks deter girls from the park, full stop. The research in America fitted fitness trackers to girls, and it's really fascinating body of research, all sorts of ways they measured it. But one of the key things that came out was that parks are great. The nearer a girl lived to a park, the more active she was. Brilliant. Unless that park was a skate park, then her activity levels were below average. And we've seen this in the UK, where a park in on the south coast had a tiny pot of money, went to teenage girls, said, what should we do with it to make the park better for you? They said, put a gate in that fence over there so we can get out of the park without walking past the skate park. There's an imaginary slide here as well, which is about pitches, because I normally put it in, we didn't have much time, but people have been talking about pitches. Pitches are also a problem. We've done some deep, I can talk about the figures to people who want to, but we've done some deep dive into some Sport England data. The women and girls teams across all grass pitches are only 10%. It's 8% for football. So pitches are male spaces. And girls, we did some work that was funded by Natural England in Oxford, talking to girls whose local park was really a recreation ground full of pitches. They see the pitches as man-spreading. And what they said was, if we sit on the grass and somebody comes along with a ball, we can't use that space. They've got more right. So pitches are also, and you can end up with parks, I won't name the developer who produced this, but when a new park is being developed, it's got 2 pitches, a Mooger and a skate park. And on the one we were shown, there was an area of grass that was labelled kickabout area. So parks become incredibly male spaces that girls just don't feel they have any right to be in. As all these statistics show, girls just do not feel comfortable in public spaces. So why does this need to change? Obviously, it's just a massive piece of discrimination that shouldn't be going on. And one of the reasons that Make Space for Girls exist is that it's just such a clear-cut case. Boys are getting 90% of the facilities, girls are being designed out of space. And what that space is telling them is that basically they belong at home. And I kind of thought we were over that by now. Health, I'll get onto that in a minute, it's really important. But also the law. The UN Charter on the Rights of the Child says that every child under the age of 18 has a right to play. We're not doing that very well for boys. We're really not doing it for girls. But also the Equality Act, and specifically the Public Sector Equality Duty, which says that public bodies, so not just councils but Sport England, people like that, have a duty not just to consider equality in their decisions, but to act to redress inequality. So really, there's a big sort of onus on everybody to just go back and have another look. And I don't think, nobody's done this deliberately, it's just that nobody's quite seen what's going on. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then hopefully we've got the impetus to change. Health is really crucial because teenage girls are less active than teenage boys at every stage of adolescence, but we never connect that up with the fact we've not given them anything to be active on. It's like, oh, bad girls, you're not as active as boys. But crucially, there's been recent research from the Wellcome Trust, what you all know, that green spaces are really good for the mental health of young people. 20 minutes twice a week results in a significant improvement in mental health. And so in a world where teenage girls are 3 times more likely to have a mood disorder than teenage boys, surely it's a lot cheaper. It's probably the cheapest intervention is just to get them into parks. So it's really important. Also, we need to think about how these inequalities are embedded into policies and strategies. So there's an awful lot of planning policies, play strategies that go, facilities for teenagers, like a skate park and a Mooga. It's a really simple act to rewrite these and just go, let's think about all the things we can provide. Because we're not saying don't have skate parks and Moogas, but it just shouldn't be the only thing. And because developers want to do better. We talk to a lot of developers, but then they also want to get their planning permission through. So if the planning conditions say we want a skate park and a Mooga, they're going to give you a skate park and a Mooga because they don't want to have an argument. Tenders can be really important. We were approached by a company who said, could you help us make this tender more inclusive? But the council has specified a Mooga with 4-metre fences in a corner of the park that was miles away from everything else. And we said, no, not really. It's beyond fixing. We can't make something like that work for teenage girls. The good news is that lots of places are changing, that there is supplementary planning guidance. For example, in Hackney, they've written a really good piece of guidance about play and planning, which includes teenagers, includes teenage girls. South Oxfordshire have just changed their planning policy. There's 2 paragraphs in there. They're really simple. It just means they're going to get a slightly different outcome. And everyone said this already before, but how do we make things better? You don't listen to us. I mean, obviously do listen to us, but then go and talk to teenage girls because they are experts in their own space. And as Anna was saying, every place is different. You could build the most beautiful park, but if it was in the wrong place, there is no point. So talk to teenage girls. There's 2 problems. One is, if you consult with the users of the park and the teenage girls are not in the park, you are not consulting with teenage girls. You have to go out and find them. And they're quite hard to engage because, as I've said, they've given up. So you have to go out there and be persistent and persuade them that you really do mean to listen to them and you really do want to provide something. And then if you can get them on board, they will be incredible. They will be really active. Talk to the girls on their own as well. I haven't really touched on safety because Anna's obviously covered that incredibly well, but one of the big barriers for teenage girls is sexual harassment. And in a mixed group, they don't want to talk about that. Some boys are their friends, some boys are potential boyfriends, some boys are the ones they don't know who hassle them in the park. They're still teenagers, they don't want to talk about that in a mixed group. So you will not get the answers in a mixed group. Also, because boys have a shopping list. They've had stuff in parks. They know what they want. Oh yeah, we want the skate park, we want the Mooga. And so girls go like, well, we don't know. So the boys tend to take over proceedings. And so that means it takes time. And the best way of doing it is co-production. There's another invisible slide now, which is about Bradford, because Sarah would have spoken about this. We've done a very small co-production project with them in Bradford. And what was fascinating was how the girls felt they owned the space as a result of it. They weren't asked to come along and help plant the wildflower meadows that were part of the scheme, but they turned up to do it. And so the process of co-production is really important for getting them into the park. The other sidelong part of that, and also came out of the Oxford work, is teenage girls don't just want facilities, they want nature. So in the workshop this afternoon, I'm going to be talking in much more detail about, well, what do teenage girls want? How do you engage with them? What can we, how can we see a park through their eyes and make it better? But just here for now, here are some lovely pictures of, this is a co-design project from Sweden. As is this, takes up the space of a Muga. Lots of things going on, lots of different spaces, nobody can dominate it. Also, really nice shelter. And this is, sorry, everything Sweden. I've normally got more slides, but I knew I didn't have the time. And that's an amazing thing in Umeå, because as Anna was saying about darkness, if you're in the north of Sweden, you've got to have something you can use in the darkness, because really, otherwise you're only going to be using the parks for 3 months a year. And it's really worked. All of those projects have really worked. They have brought more girls into the park. That facility is used by lots of people throughout the day. In the early evening, it's just full of teenage girls using the park, socialising, being outside. That's what we're here to do.